You know, Ephesians 6:13 says, "And having done all, you stand." But what are you standing for? We at Wind Talk Radio, we stand for truth and facts, not emotion and conjecture. And our tagline at Wind Talk Radio is talk truth and take action. So come join us, take action to save our republic, to ensure our liberty. Because remember, when we show up, we win.
Welcome to another episode of Wind Talk Radio. I'm Jannique Stewart, and I'm joined by my lovely co-hosts, Debbie Healy. I have our fearless leader, Sue Trombino, and we have lots of fun here. We have so much fun. We're always laughing, but this is Sue Trombino, our founder and president, and Cari Campos. So today we're going to be talking about a really important episode, and so I'm so glad that you're here. It's an issue that we're hearing about. If you turn on the news, I guarantee you're hearing about it. But I actually want to begin with this quote from August 28th, 1963. Can you tell me who said this? I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but the content of their character. Now think about that. That is in complete juxtaposition of what I'm now going to read. White people raised in Western society are conditioned into a white supremacist worldview because it's the bedrock of our society and the institutions. Entering the conversation with this understanding is freeing because it allows us to focus on, now here it is, how, rather than if racism is manifest. You see, obviously, I'm sure you can guess what we're going to be talking about in this episode is critical race theory and why we must take a stand against it. Martin Luther King, 50 years ago, was saying that his dream was that his children would be raised in a nation where they weren't looking at the color of skin. Yet now, we are dealing with a critical race theory, and my friends, it is just that, a theory. It doesn't say critical race fact. It doesn't. It's not critical race truth. It is critical race theory. That means it's someone's theory that we should be looking at ethnicity, specifically race, as a way to actually look at our society, that's the lens that we should be looking through when we see everyone. Now let's think through that. What are the implications of critical race theory, ladies? And I want you to think about, how is this really going to impact our nation? We know that this is actually taking place in our military. People are buying into it in the military, sadly. We see it in big tech. We see it in entertainment, social media, and of course, those ideas, it's one thing for that to be taught at the academic level where it's a course that you can choose to take or choose not to take. But we're talking about K through 12 education, where now this is being forced upon children and parents cannot opt out. That means this is going against parental rights. But again, I want us to consider, does it really make any sense whatsoever that the lens that we're going to look at one another is on the basis of race? Now, critical race theory, in case you're unaware of what it actually stands for and what it means, just to really simplify this, because we want to keep this short and to the point, critical race theory is an ideology and it is a worldview. At one time, in the legal setting, it was used perhaps from an academic perspective. It actually has Marxist, or what now we refer to as neo-Marxist or cultural Marxist undertones. It goes all the way back to the Frankfurt School dealing with Marxism. But then they've also infused it with postmodernism, and now we saw the term critical race theory being coined by, there are actually a couple of people, but Derek Bell and Kimberly Crenshaw are mostly the ones that are attributed to coming up with that terminology. And of course, at one point it was at the academic level in legal, in legal courses. But now it has made its way into everyday situations where now, sadly, people are adopting this ideology, and this is what's being taught K through 12. Now, part of critical race theory is dividing human beings into two categories. You're either the oppressor or you are the oppressed. And when they say the oppressed, that means you're a victim. And what is the basis of that? It's color of skin. So the whites, as you just heard from that quote, that is the oppressor. Blacks and minorities are the oppressed. We are the so-called victims. Now that quote that I read was actually from one of the most, sadly, I even hate to acknowledge this, but it happens to be a fact that right now one of the most widely read books is called White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. And so she is saying that, and they believe critical race theory, it operates under this ideology, number one, that racism is present at all times. And in fact, even in that quote that I read you, it was saying not if, but how racism is manifest, how it's present. That means every single situation, we're supposed to, if you buy into critical race theory, then that means you're buying into the ideology that every single person that's white is automatically racist. Never mind the condition of their heart.
Right.
So that's really sad to me. So what do you all think about this, and where are you all seeing this coming up?
Well, I think that, really what tugs at my heart is we're adults. We get it. It's a theory. It doesn't make sense. But what happens is they're putting this in front of little children who haven't got that thought process. So how sad, it's really propaganda. And these children who should be innocent and playing on the playground with their little friends, black, white, Chinese, Indian, it doesn't matter. It's just so sad that our children are being targeted. And we can try to reason, and we know that this is ridiculous, but the children that are hearing this day in, day out, oh, I shouldn't be Jannique's friend, or I shouldn't be, that's the damage that's being done in America. And as parents, we see parents standing up against this. And
Actually, when my son was in 3rd grade, they were doing some lesson, they were all together, and my son Nathan said something to the teacher, one of his friends, and then she asked who it was, and he said, I know, it's the brown boy. And his teacher was like, oh, she's like, we can't be racist. And so he came home and said, am I racist? And I was like, why? And he said, because I said it was the brown boy. And she said, told me what. I was like, well, that his skin is brown, yours is a little bit lighter brown, mine's just a tan. Like, it's just this ideology that you're exactly right.
Yes.
Kids don't understand, and you tell a kid you're racist. And my kid, who's half Hispanic and half white, came home and asked me if he was racist. And it's just like, and that wasn't even the critical race theory agenda. It was just one teacher saying one thing. So,
Well, there is so much, well, first of all, there's only one race. Let's just get that out there. And I think that it's going to be incumbent of all of us to be able to start speaking truth. But you can't speak truth unless you know what your truth is. Well, not what your truth is, but obviously the truth. And there's one race, and that's the human race. We all bleed red. We all have different. There's no real white. I mean, because if I put up against Jannique, well, you know what? Yeah, she's a little darker than me, but you're a little bit whiter than me. But I'm dark compared. You know what I'm saying? It just is, it's just silliness. And I think we've got to learn to stand against the wiles of the devil. Say, you know what? No, I am not a racist. I mean, goodness gracious, my pastor's black. I've knocked on doors for black, candidates. I've lived in Africa. Some of my best friends are black. I mean, what does that have to do with the price of beans in China? It's about it's not about the color of your skin or the slant of your eyes. It's about the content of your character. And so we have got to start standing up there and not saying, oh geez, everybody's calling, it is all propaganda. I mean, serious propaganda. I've lived it my whole life in different countries. You see it, you're going, what the heck? But it is an ideology, and obviously we come from a Judeo-Christian perspective, so we think, well, what does God say about that? I love you, or I like you because of your heart, not because of what your skin color is or your hair color, or, I mean, we're always the blondes are always the brunt of blonde jokes and everything else, and we just gotta, sometimes I think we just gotta kind of just stop and go, you know what? Stop. We're called racist, homophobic, all this, but it's all name calling. And we have got to stand up and say, you know what? Stop. First of all, what does that mean to you? What does racism mean to you? I don't even know what that means. I'm like, I didn't grow up that way. I mean, my parents, I grew up overseas my entire life. There was blacks. I mean, I'm Hispanic, really. I don't look it, but I am, But I just think we just need to just start standing up and just saying enough. But we're so afraid of what everybody thinks, and I think we've got to get back to what does God say about you? Not what your neighbor thinks. Only God's going to get you into heaven, not your neighbor or what everybody else thinks. And if you are not, we're so afraid to be called racist. Like, why? Are you one? I mean, it's like, well, why are you afraid of that? What is the fear level? Why is there so much fear? I don't know,
But even how does God tell us to look at one another? Man looks at the outward appearance, but God looks at what?
Your heart.
The heart.
Right.
So racism, now, let's be also very clear. Sometimes people like to say, oh, but the reason that you all are rejecting critical race theory is because you don't want to talk about history. You don't want to talk about some of the injustices that have happened. Let's be very clear. I don't know a single person with any common sense who wants to deny the facts of American history. But if we're also going to be talking about American history, we actually have to talk about the truth in American history as well. Just as we talk about the Bible and teaching the whole counsel, we need to also teach the facts of history, which means that we also have to talk that when we think about our nation, and you even think about our founding fathers, yes, some of them did have slaves, but even the ones that did have slaves, people like to bring up Thomas Jefferson, but even Thomas Jefferson, you actually look at some of the founding documents, and especially the Declaration of Independence, again, that we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. Now, many people like to say, yeah, but black people weren't even considered then, and that actually is not true. In fact, Thomas Jefferson actually had written some information about slaves saying, listen, again, made in the image of God. And that's what we actually need to be teaching is whole history. Now, again, we know that America is not perfect, but there's a reason why America is considered and has and still is an exceptional nation. Let me tell you, there is no other country. I was born and raised in Europe, born in Germany. People aren't dying, sacrificing their lives to get to Germany, but people are doing everything within their power to come to America.
And if you consider America's history, which is what we're missing here, is yes, we are not perfect, but we are exceptional. And what other country, maybe besides England, went to war to free slavery? And hundreds of thousands of people died in that fight, and a large percent were white people. And we have to acknowledge that. We have a history, but look where we've come through that history.
Yes, but also, if we talk about history, was slavery in every single state of the Union? No. I mean, when you look at, we have the North and the South, but if you were listening to critical race theorists, you would think that slavery was in every single state, and it was not. But let's even set that aside for a moment. If we take history, even if slavery was in every single state and every single person owned a slave, that has nothing to do with where we are right now today in 2021. Regardless of whether or not there were, and we know that there were systemic injustices of the past, we do not have systemic laws right now on the books that one can point to and say, well, actually, blacks are discriminated against here and here because it's a law. That's not true. Individuals actually discriminate. So that means, is there racism right now in 2021? Yes. Is every single person, specifically is every single white person, guilty of racism right now? No. So I reject that lie, and that's exactly what it is, that every single white person is racist. But here's the other aspect with critical race theory. They believe that only whites can be racist. But let's be honest. Can anyone, out of their heart, because we sin, that comes out of our heart, can anyone discriminate against another person based on the color of their skin? Absolutely. So I think if our goal is to talk truth, right, so we can take action, we have to expose these facts. So we will be right back. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you soon. WomenImpactingTheNation.org.
Here at Wind Talk Radio, as Judeo-Christians in America, we have three choices. We can either fight, we can support the fighters, or we can do nothing we encourage you all, take a stand today.
Welcome back to Win Talk Radio. Today we are talking about critical race theory and why we need to take a stand against it. And in this segment, we're actually going to be looking at what are some of the misconceptions, what are some things that we need to know about American history, but also how can we take action? How can we take action against elected officials and those that are actually trying to force this into K through 12 education? So what can we do? So with that said, I think, Sue, we were talking during the break and Sue brought up a really important point along with Debbie and Cari. So let's talk about, what did you want to mention about other nations?
Oh, well, we're not the only country that had slaves. I mean, every country on the face of the planet had slaves. And, unfortunately, they still have them. We don't. We've rectified ourselves. That's what's really awesome about America is that nobody's perfect. And boy, if you point the finger, you got 3 pointing back at yourself. Nobody is perfect. And so, but if there was anything more perfect, was our Constitution, because it was breathed really by God. And so I just think it's imperative that we understand our history. And one thing about critical race theory is that they don't want to have let's have a dialogue. We've lost our capacity to have a dialogue. We can agree to disagree. Why is it that you're trying to jam this down our throat when it's not factual? Say, okay, well, you want to give your side? Great. Let's talk about your point. Now I want to talk about my point. Let's look at the facts. Not what you think it is or what you're making up, but let's go back to the founding fathers, what they said, what they did, not what we want them to be, that kind of thing. So I think it's incumbent of like Hosea 4:6, we perish for a lack of knowledge, and we're so not knowledgeable anymore about our history because everything sounds good, or we've really dumbed ourselves down. Because it's hard to try to figure out the right thing because it takes time, and it's but we're so lazy and we just don't want to figure it out, and we want to watch something on TV that's just entertaining. And so no, we've got to get back to go back to what our founding fathers did, what our history was, and then we talked. You mentioned something, Cari, about the Civil War. Talk to them about what we were talking about.
We knew some of this information, but when we were on our family vacation, we were in Tennessee in Pigeon Forge, and right on the main drag there is a theater called the Button Willow Civil War Theater, and of course my husband was like, "Ooh, Civil War," and I was like, okay. But we get in there, and this guy he's done this for 30 years, used to travel into public schools. And it's a play, but it's a true historical fact. So he presents the Southern history, because the Ellis says the South lost the war, so of course the history is written by the North. And he talks about, we knew a lot of this because we've researched it, but he talks about how even things like, they say the North had no slaves. Well, in fact, the North had more slaves than the South, because the ports into America was New York and Boston and South Carolina. But what happened was, when the potato famine from Ireland came, the Irish came to the Boston and New York area, and they realized that it was easier and cheaper to enslave the Irish than it was to pay for a black person who was a slave. The black people at the time were about $2,000, and an Irish person was about 10 cents an hour, or if that. And so then they sold their slaves to the South, and that's how all the slaves got to the South. And then they virtue signaled and said, look at all those slaves that the South is owning, when they were enslaving the Irish, but nobody talks about the Irish being enslaved. So it was just like this mind-blowing, and the fact that the Civil War was about states' rights, and Lincoln killed over 33,000 people because they disagreed with him land grabbing. And it was about the issue of the civil rights originally was because they wanted to secede from the Union, but the main industry of the day was crops, and all the crops were grown in the South. So had they seceded, the whole North would have fallen, because the main industry and all of our revenue was through the crop. And it was just like, you're just like...
Well, and it's interesting.
But I do want to say, I do believe God used that Civil War for the purpose of freeing slaves in America.
Exposing evil. Yes, absolutely.
It's totally off the subject
and
of what we're
it's
talking
interesting
about.
with the Irish, with what you were saying up in the north, it's all about how you say it. And they were indentured servants. So because they were indentured servants, we don't equate the slavery, even though it looked the same, it smelled the same, it was the same, but because we had a different name for it, it really wasn't slavery.
Right. Yeah.
You know, it's funny. This is a little bit off topic, but it was funny when you were just talking, Cari, on you said, you know, Massey was so excited about the history. And I think this is what happens with everybody. You know, it doesn't seem real appealing sometimes. It's like, oh, you know, and I think all of us have forgotten what we learned in 5th grade or 6th grade or whatever. But years ago, we were taking 5 boys up to a camp in Tennessee. And we were going through, we had all 5 of them, we were going to stay overnight, and we went through Atlanta. They wanted to do 6 Flags. And my husband was like, we're not taking any of these boys to some water park. And he saw in one of the parks that they were having a reenactment. So he's like, oh, we're taking them to the reenactment. Well, of course, they're going, oh, gosh, this is going to be boring. Well, let me tell you, we get to the park. Of course, they have a store. And they all went in there, and of course I had all their money, so they're going, oh, Mrs. Trombino, you know, we want our money, because they saw all these long rifles, you know, and everything. And after they saw some of the really cool encampments things, they were like all fired up. We gave them all their guns. They had all these long rifles. They found a little boy, and he was part of the reenactment. He must have been about 12 years old, and he was, they would be shooting him, and he would act like he was dead. But let me tell you, those kids to this day, and now they're 30s, they still, I think Mikey still has that gun, and we have it somewhere, and they can remember that because it was fun. But getting to really know history and understanding what that's about, and I think that the reason I brought that up is because if we know our history, making it fun, not just also boring lectures or whatever, but getting kids out there, then we understand where we've been, so now we know that where we are, that this CRT movement stuff is such falsehoods, it's such lies. And when anybody's trying to jam something down your throat, that should be, no pun intended, but shouldn't that be a red flag?
Absolutely.
It's like, wait a minute, let's have a conversation about our history.
Can I say something to that too? We had we were at a Moms for Liberty meeting on Monday of this week. Massey spoke there, and Moms for Liberty is a new group. They're amazing. They started really getting moms involved in what's the curriculums going on, the school board, really integrated into the school system. And she said that what's happening is because parents, grandparents, families are standing up against CRT, they're repackaging it and renaming it. And I don't even know what the renaming is. It doesn't matter what the renaming is, because it matters that you get involved into actually learning what your kids are learning.
So that's the last thing that I actually want to talk about then, is how can we take action? One of the ways that you can take action is by understanding, most of the time, very rarely actually, across the country, are schools using curriculum that uses the terminology critical race theory. It has been disguised as diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's exactly, it's all about inclusion. And they've even replaced equality, which again, as human beings, we equally bear the image of God because we're made in His image. Now we see people, and we live in a society that used to use the word equality. And we know that we have an equal, not only do we have equal human rights, we have equal value. So we've always been, America has always been about that. About let's talk about equality and all of those things. Now, of course, at one time when we look at the past, we do see that there were times where human beings were not treated equally. But since 1964, moving forward, and that was the Civil Rights Act in 1964, and moving forward since then, there has been this focus on equality. Well, now through critical race theory, they've replaced equality with now equity, which is trying to, it's not saying, you see, equality was about, let's make sure that we all have the same opportunities. Now it's, let's make sure that we can guarantee that we all have the exact same outcome. And that means, even if it means discriminating against individuals on the basis of the color of their skin. Now, let's think about that. What CRTs believe then is that you can discriminate against white people. But if we're being clear, If it's wrong to discriminate against someone on the basis of the color of their skin, and we know that happened with black people, why do we somehow think that that's okay to do if it is reversed and it's now against white people? Discrimination on the basis of color is discrimination on the basis of color, and it's wrong, no matter how you want to change it, no matter what title you want to give it. And so that's why we have to consider what ultimately is truth. You know, Jesus said in John 8, you shall know the truth, and the truth will set you what? Free. That's what we should be pursuing, is not what's politically correct, but what actually is the truth. And that's what we need to be to rising up. And one way that we can do that, we've seen all these different YouTube videos of parents standing up at school board meetings. But I also want to remind people, we need people to run for school board. A lot of people think that the most important election is the presidential. It's not.
It's the least.
Yeah.
Exactly. We can actually have, at the local level, more change can take place. So we need people. Maybe God is calling you, and we've talked about this before in several different episodes. You know, we believe that God is always raising up a remnant. He's raising up a remnant of people, and I believe that he's also raising up people to run for school board. Maybe he's raising up people to be the teachers that will say, nope, I'm not teaching racism, which is what critical race theory is. Let's just call it. It's called racism. Maybe God is raising up teachers who will take a stand against that. But we definitely need local leaders who are going to rise up and say, nope, not on my watch. And so also as parents, if you've not gone to a school board meeting, now's your time to go to a school board meeting. You need to know what is the curriculum that they're trying to pass. Read the curriculum. See if they're actually using code words that they're not using the words critical race theory, but are they trying to appeal to this diversity and equity and some type of inclusion, which is also inclusion of the LGBTQ, which is called intersectionality. And another show will actually get into that deeper, because this is in fact, with Women Impacting the Nation, we talk truth so we can take action. We're going to continue having these conversations. This is not just a one-time conversation. We will continue to address this because we know that it's relevant right now. Did you want to say anything else?
No, it'll be for another time.
But we also
come
know
back.
when we show up, and when these parents are showing up,
They're
we
winning.
are winning.
Yes.
And that's what it's all about.
It sure is. Yep. When we show up, we win. Exactly. Thanks, Debbie. So thank you again for joining us for another episode of Women Impacting the Nation. You can find us at womenimpactingthenation.org. Again, that's womenimpactingthenation.org. Please follow us, like us, subscribe, and share our podcast with other people. You can find our podcast where great podcasts can be found. So that's everywhere. And you can also find us on YouTube as well. But please join this movement, because we are going to show up. We're going to win. But it takes us, we the people, caring about what's going on in our society. Do we care about liberty? Do we want to save our republic? Well, we can do that. But it's going to take us coming together. So I thank you again for joining us. We hope to see you soon. Remember, when we show up, we win. Thank you.